Hi, my name's Nina Fountain. I'm a workplace strategist at Transform Teams. And a workplace strategist, if you haven't come across that term before, essentially means that we help you bring together your workplace with your people and culture elements to align with your goals and achieve the direction that you're looking for. So today we're talking about practical tips for keeping your team connected. And we will go into a range of different ideas. So let's get into it. 10 minutes of power-packed information, I hope, where every word counts today. Feel free to reach out if you want any clarification on anything. And so to start with, you may have noticed that in your teams, there have been a lot of positive developments from working more remotely this year, or potentially, and maybe alongside that, some of the downsides as well. Some downsides in your team interactions. This is what I'm hearing people saying, that they are finding themselves exhausted by all of the video meetings that they're having with clients and with other teams within the organization. It can be hard to have those conversations. They feel less organic. There are people in a range of different situations physically, and then in that virtual space, it can be difficult to get a sense of the room, especially if the meeting's hybrid and you've got some people in a physical location and you've got others who are virtual. The robustness of the conversation seems to be suffering a little bit, where people are not able to engage in the same way as they might if they were physically present together. And so that can mean that getting onto the same page and having a shared view by the end of the meeting is even more difficult. So it certainly is an important area for us to look at, because we know that when teams do connect, when that interpersonal connection is there and their relationships are flowing smoothly and communication is great, that people are more likely to share information with each other. They're more likely to solve problems and to keep that trusting working relationship that really is the foundation for doing good work together. So trust is certainly not only about this, that's another webinar, but this interpersonal connection really helps. So in short, team connection is the antidote to being out of sight and out of mind. And it can seem incredibly difficult to pull this together and to pull it off in a remote team. But does it need to be? Do we just need some more practical ideas, perhaps? And some of the ideas that I'm seeing teams using and reaching for, I guess, at the moment, are the possibility of a different tool. Perhaps a new rhythm as a team in terms of team meetings and getting together, more informal catch-ups. Matching coffee cups has been really well used by remote teams around the world. In other circumstances, it helps people to feel like they are sharing something in common. It could be Friday drinks. Maybe it needs to be Tuesday drinks. Maybe it's using the phone more and hearing each other's voices rather than using email. It could be a live stream room, which means that you've got a separate dedicated space, a virtual space where you go to talk and to meet, and perhaps you bump into people there, you just drop in and see who's there. That can be really great if you're doing long pieces of collaborative work and you really need to be almost the equivalent of sitting side by side. Perhaps it's more time spent physically together in the same space, and perhaps that makes it worth thinking about hiring a space in a co-working centre. And these are all really great ideas, and they're obviously the things that we think of when it comes to team connection. But there is one core idea that would simplify all of this, and I'm always about that core idea that has massive leverage. My background is in the applied science of communication, which is what drew me to this work with remote teams. And the communication challenge is really particularly interesting. But there is one thing I've noticed in that area that we have got wrong in remote teams. It's less obvious, but even more important. In our pre-remote communication, we either lost or we never had a really clear concept of what it means to connect when we communicate. We've seen communication like a telegraph, where information packets are sent and received. And perhaps there's some interference, which we acknowledge is created by that field of experience. But now that we're in remote teams, we can see more easily how communication can go wrong. We can send that packet of information, and more often than not, it doesn't arrive the way that we expected. So, what we need is a concept of communication that shows us what successful remote teams do. And essentially, what they do is they tap into the meaning that goes beyond the message. They recognize that we always have this potential to connect people or to disconnect them based on how we manage meaning. And that connection comes through warm working relationships where people are having a rewarding communication experience. It's really critical for maintaining interest and commitment. So, as a positive example, I participated recently as an ad hoc advisor on a steering group, and the meetings were remote. And when I let the project team know that my work with the client was coming to an end, the project manager volunteered his thanks for my contribution, and we talked about it quite a bit, the fact that I was leading the group. And for my part, I'd noticed that the meetings were well organised, it was relatively easy to participate and to add value. So I received a message in that context that was quite in addition to the work that we had engaged on. And it was that I was valued and others were valued. And so naturally, I thanked him in turn for his well-run meetings. A negative example could be when remote team members organise to get together but forget to invite someone who wasn't in the initial conversation. So that person could be offended not by what was said, but by the lack of communication and the circumstances. So in teams that succeed remotely, they really actively manage the meaning, and then the message practically takes care of itself. It's a little bit like the dentist saying, if you brush between your teeth will get clean. You won't even need to think about it. So if you think like this, you'll unlock a new capability in your teams as they become aware that every act of communication or miscommunication creates something larger and more significant and has that potential to connect or disconnect people. So practically, what does that mean? It's an idea, it's a model, but there are some fantastic practical applications for this. And there's essentially 4 elements that you can manage to manage the meaning. The first one is choosing the platform that suits the task. And not all platforms are created equal. There are rich ones and there are poor ones. Poor communication platforms include texting, email, essentially text-based platforms. Rich communication platforms are video conferencing and in-person meetings, for example. So when there's an asynchronous communication that's text-based, that can be quite good for confirming steps, for passing on information, for discussing non-contentious things. And obviously we don't always know when something's going to become contentious, but when it does, or if it's sensitive or complex, or there's some kind of nuance to the context, then that's when we need to think about actually having an in-person conversation, face-to-face, or literally physically in person. So firstly, have a conversation with your team about the platforms you use and what they're good for, so that in future you can choose the platform that suits the task. Secondly, it's about managing timing. And this is a fairly easy one to relate to. If you've ever had the situation where someone wants to discuss the situation important to them, but it happened so long ago that you can barely engage with it. So that's timing that's too late. Or if you've tried to talk through a problem before with someone, or they've tried to talk through a problem with you before you've had a chance to read the key document, then that's timing that's too early. So think about instances where timing is too late or too early, and talk with your team about how to change that. Establishing direct relevance might seem really straightforward, but this is something that teams often manage poorly, and it's the reason why meetings can be so unproductive and can feel like a waste of time. So everyone needs to know why, and push back on invitations that don't outline that direct relevance to the team and to each individual. And the last and fourth thing to do is to manage participation. So that is, how do you want decisions made, or do you want input? Do you want a new idea, or is it about healthy criticism? So I'd say on this one, lead by example by making the roles in meetings clear and making it clear to people how they're going to participate. And for example, we have a group model that we use to facilitate effective collaboration that really clearly helps people to know what to expect and how to be involved. So 4 key aspects there. and you're welcome to take up a discovery call.